What's going on, everybody? Anthony Cervino here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube channel with my 5 players that you must start in your fantasy football lineups for Week 8. We're going to start with Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker could go nuclear this week. In his past 2 games, he's gone for over 20.9 fantasy points. He has found the end zone 3 times, including 2 times last week against a tough Atlanta Falcons front 7 on the road. This is the best version of Kenneth Walker I believe we've seen in his career. The Grub offense is opening things up for Kenneth Walker. He's getting 17.6 touches per game. He has a 35.4% broken tackle rate, which is 100th percentile using the tools on rotowire.com. He has an 88.5% catch rate, and he's getting 9.7% of his team targets. He's a do-it-all running back on one of the better offenses in the NFL when everything is clicking. And now he has a dream smash matchup against the Buffalo Bills. And the Buffalo's defense, they did shut down Tony Pollard last week, but let's go into the context. There was no semblance of a passing attack with Tennessee, and the Bills knew it. They shut down Tony Pollard rather easily, and he still almost managed double-digit PPR points. But if we look deeper, this Buffalo defense has been smashed and gashed by the running back position all season long. Since week 4, notably, the Buffalo Bills have allowed over 20 PPR points to 3 different running backs. Both Derrick Henry and Justice Hill went for over 21. Breece Hall went for 21.9. And if we go back to Houston in week 5, Dare Ogunbowale and Cam Akers combined for over 25 PPR points. So there's a lot of fantasy points to be had for the running back position in this matchup. And with the way Walker has been playing and the usage he is getting, I think he's in store for another big-time outing in your fantasy football lineups. Next up, I'm going to go to George Pickens. I love George Pickens with Russell Wilson. All offseason long, I was drafting George Pickens and touting George Pickens, assuming it was going to be Russ in week 1, and it was not. It was Justin Fields. And while Justin Fields was commanding that offense, we only had one nice game from George Pickens. In one game with Russ, George Pickens outperformed that one nice game with Justin Fields. He had 22.1 PPR points against a pretty good Jets secondary. He had the best of Sauce Gardner a lot of the times last week. 9 targets, 5 catches, 111 yards, and a touchdown. We saw Russ open up the deep ball to George Pickens. George Pickens last week had 2 big plays over 20 yards, including one over 40 yards, and averaged 22.2 yards per catch. He also had 3 red zone targets, including 2 targets inside the 5-yard line. He's being used for the big play. He's being used in the red area. And I think this is another nice spot against the New York Football Giants. The Giants are a good defense, but they're not a great defense. And if we look inside the numbers, the Giants have been gashed by the wide receiver position at times this season. In their past few games, they have allowed over 19.9 PPR points to A.J. Brown last week, and dating back to week 3, Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb both went for over 23.6. Now, in that period, the 2 low games from wideouts, Seattle wide receivers, they didn't do well, but Seattle blew that game open at home with the running game, and they didn't really have to throw a lot to win. And then against Cincinnati, that was another game where not a lot of points were scored. That was a national televised game at night. And it was just a awkward game altogether. But T. Higgins still led all Bengals receivers, 7 for 77 yards, 14.7. So I think we get a decent floor out of George Pickens. But if he gets the same usage from Russell Wilson this week against the Giants, I think he's going to put together another 20-plus point PPR outing. There's not a lot of weapons, pass-catching weapons on the Steelers. Russell Wilson knows that, and George Pickens has the skill set to beat any corner, as we've seen last week with Sauce Gardner to an extent. He can win the contested catch, and he can win in terms of separation. Let's go to my next must start, and I'm going to go to Davante Adams. Last week was a big-time disappointment. Davante Adams, first game with the New York Jets against the aforementioned Pittsburgh Steelers, he just couldn't get going. Pittsburgh's defense is really good, right? They have one of the better pass rushes in the NFL. New York's offensive line is still a work in progress, and it just did not click. That changes this week against New England. New England's defense, another one, good, not great. I would say it's more on the side of mediocre, and they have a hard time rushing the passer, which means we expect Aaron Rodgers, who has been playing better despite the mistakes, to have time to throw. And Davante Adams, who did have 9 targets last week, I think this is the game we see that old Rodgers, Davante Adams connection cook. Obviously, there's Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. This Jets offense, they have a lot of weapons. But there is a world where I see Aaron Rodgers wanting to get Davante Adams involved. Obviously, we saw that last week with all that volume. I think it happens again. And if it does, Davante Adams is going to pop in our fantasy football lineups. They trade for Davante Adams, not only to not produce, but to not produce and lose. That was a really poor showing, despite the talented defensive efforts from Pittsburgh. They need to get Davante Adams going. They need to jumpstart this Jets offense and team overall. So look for Davante Adams to be force-fed this week against New England. And New England's second, like people tout Christian Gonzalez. I don't know if he's worth all the hype. Wide receivers this year, they've realistically, the better ones at least, have had their way. Notably, the past 2 games, we've seen Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell both go over 18.7 PPR points. They both went over 57 yards for a touchdown back in week 6 against Jacksonville in London. Brian Thomas, the outstanding rookie, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 89 yards and a touchdown. He went for over 20. Seattle receivers in week 2, both JSN and DK Metcalf go for over 23. So again, a lot of production can be had. And there's a world where both Davante and Garrett Wilson cook this week. Must start Davante Adams. Remember, folks, if you like content like this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the alert icon so you can be notified anytime we go live to answer your questions or we drop outstanding content just like this. If you have start sit questions, drop them in the comment section below. We will get back to you as soon as we can. Let's close this out. We have 2 more. We're going to start with Tyreek Hill. I get it. Tyreek Hill, big-time disappointment. It's not Tyreek's fault. It's the fact that Tua has been out, and Miami's front office, they weren't smart enough to back up Tua with a more competent quarterback, with guys like Joe Flacco, or even Jimmy Garoppolo was out there, who knows this system from being with Mike McDaniel in San Francisco. That's another conversation for another time with the inept front office in Miami. But this is a spot, if you held on to Tyreek Hill, or if you acquired Tyreek Hill during this lull, it's going to begin to pay off really quick as soon as this week against the Arizona Cardinals. Tyreek Hill only had 1 catch last week for 8 yards. That is not good enough. This season altogether has not been good enough for Miami or Tyreek Hill. And this is another guy. You want to ignite this offense, you want to ignite this football team and fan base, you got to get your guys involved. Tua, barring any weird setbacks, is playing this week, and we're firing up Tyreek Hill against Arizona, whose defense, Okay, I get it. They shut down the Chargers. This Chargers passing attack is not there. They don't have a lot of guys. And on Monday Night Football, I believe the Cardinals defense looked better than it actually is. And in fact, I know it looked better than it actually is. If you go back to this season, we've seen multiple wide receivers from multiple teams go off in these matchups. I mean, going back to week 6 against Green Bay, 3 different wide receivers, Dobbs, Watson, Reed, over 14.8 PPR points, 4 touchdowns were scored between the 3 of them. Guys like McLaurin, Ayuk in his only game he did anything this year, it was against this football team. Amon-Ra St. Brown, everybody with a pulse has gone off in this matchup against Arizona. And I expect Tyreek Hill to pop in your fantasy football lineups. Again, if you held on to him, if you acquired him, don't even think about it. Don't sweat it. You put him in there. He's going off. We're going to close with Drake London. Drake London this year, obviously his best season of his career, obviously because Zach Robinson, Kirk Cousins, we know why. Since week 1 against Pittsburgh, where nobody got going, we've seen Drake London go for at least 12.4 PPR points as his floor. In the other 5 games since week 1, he's gone for at least 17. The best game of the year has come against Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 5, where he caught 12 of 13 for $154 and 1, good for 33.4 fantasy points. Guess who he gets again this week? Tampa Bay. That same Tampa Bay defense that Kirk Cousins lit up, we saw on national television. Lamar Jackson light them up. In fact, I think Lamar is still throwing touchdown passes. And historically, in these matchups, in 3 out of his past 4 games against Tampa Bay, Drake London has gone for at least 18, and he's gone for at least 27.2 in each of his past 2. We are absolutely positively smash starting Drake London for another monster out.